About a month ago, we discussed Dimension Fusion Destruction, the first of multiple new Sacred Beast support cards in the upcoming structure deck centered around the fan favorite strategy. This card was actually featured in the anime, and the effect is pretty darn similar. It's basically a Miracle Fusion for Sacred Beasts, and I like it a lot. But one card was not enough to make any predictions about how Sacred Beast will actually end up being once that structure deck is released. Luckily, just a few days ago, we got 4 more new cards, and I want to talk about them in today's video. Once again, we won't see these in the TCG for a little while, but they will come eventually, which is going to be pretty exciting for fans of Sacred Beasts. Just to give you a quick overview, they've done this in a pretty interesting way. You have a new monster card based on Raphael, you have a new continuous spell card based on Hammond, and you have a new continuous trap card based on Uriah. That all makes sense, and we'll go through them, but also you have one sort of initial card that can go with any of the 3 sort of strategies that you want to do. I'm still not convinced the best way to play this deck when it eventually comes out will be every single Sacred Beast monster in the same deck and trying to summon all of them, but it at least gives you some options, and having one card that can fit into any style of strategy based around Sacred Beast is a really cool idea. I feel like the best way to do this is to start off with the one card that will definitely go into every single Sacred Beast deck, and that is Dark Beckoning Beast. So this is a card that you will probably want to play no matter what if you're playing any sort of Sacred Beast strategy. It is a level 2 Dark Fiend monster with 0 attack and 0 defense, and it says when this card is normal summon, you can add one Uriah, Hammond, or Raphael, or one card that specifically lists any of those names in its text from your deck to your hand, except Dark Beckoning Beast, of course. You can only use this effect of Dark Beckoning Beast once per turn, and then also during your main phase, you can normal summon one Fiend monster with 0 attack and 0 defense in addition to your normal summon or set, and of course you can only gain that extra normal summon once per turn, which makes a lot of sense. Now this card, to me at least, seems like a staple 3 of in every single Sacred Beast deck, no matter which variant you're trying to play. And there's a lot that you can search with this card, so already you could search Dark Summoning Beast or Fallen Paradise, 2 really solid Sacred Beast cards. Keep in mind you can also search Dimension Fusion Destruction, which might be one of the more viable ways to use this card, and you can search the next 3 cards we're going to mention. So this is definitely a staple 3 of in any Sacred Beast deck, and it'll likely be the card that you want to open the most often in your Sacred Beast deck. Anyway, let's talk about some of the cards that this thing can actually search, because they're all pretty interesting. So the first one is Raphael, Lord of Phantasms, Shimmering Scraper. I'm not sure if that name will stay the same for the TCG, but that's what it is right now. And this card is really weird. So it says, cannot be normal summon or set, must be special summon from your hand by tributing 3 monsters. Please keep in mind this card has no other effects on the field, but you could theoretically summon it if you wanted to. More importantly, while in the hand as a quick effect, you can discard this card, then target one Raphael you control. For the rest of his turn, its attack becomes doubled. Also, it can attack all monsters your opponent controls once each. If this card is in your graveyard, you contribute 1 monster, any monster, obviously on your side of the field, add this card to your hand, and then of course both effects are a hard once per turn effect, but luckily you can use both of them in the same turn. The strategy here is pretty straightforward. You just summon Raphael while your opponent has a couple monsters on the field with not a lot of attack points. You boost it up to 8,000 attack and attack each of them once, and hopefully just OTK your opponent in that battle phase. There are a few issues with this. The biggest issue is that during the turn that you would summon a Raphael with Dark Summoning Beast, which is the way that a lot of people might want to summon it because it's by far the easiest, you're actually not allowed to attack, which is a real shame because that means that you have to wait 1 turn before using that hand trap, which probably isn't good. Raphael has no protection effects, and while you might have Fallen Paradise, which can protect it some, in general it's going to be pretty tough to make this thing hit the field and have that card in hand and have the Fallen Paradise and not die before your next turn. That sounds pretty rough, which means that you'd have to summon Raphael using its own effect. Now it's not impossible, I mean it's far from impossible, to summon 3 Fiend monsters to tribute for this card. Thank God these Sacred Beasts are special summons and not normal summons, but it's still pretty difficult. But before we talk about this too much more, let's move on to the next card, Cerulean Skyfire, Hammond's continuous spell card. So this thing says, to special summon Hammond, Lord of Striking Thunder, using its own procedure, you can send face down spells you control to the graveyard instead of face up continuous spells, or any combination of both, which is kind of cool. Once per turn, you can negate the effect of your opponent's spell/trap card or effect that resolves while you control an attack position Hammond, then change one Hammond you control to defense mode, which is kind of neat. If a face up Uriah, Hammond, or Raphael you control leaves the field, you take no damage for the rest of this turn. So 3 three effects that are kind of all interesting, but are any of them that viable? I mean, okay, the middle effect, the negation effect, is kind of neat. Unfortunately, it does not negate monster effects, just spell and trap activations or effects, which is kind of a downside, but other than that, I mean, I'm not really seeing where this card would be played. The last effect is borderline irrelevant. I mean, it's just a small bonus, and the first effect, while interesting and while kind of cool, doesn't matter. It wasn't that hard to summon Hammond in the first place. Uriah is the one that's harder to summon, and we'll get to that trap card in a second because that helps out, but this one, I mean, I don't think Hammond was very difficult to summon. It might even be the easiest Sacred Beast monster to summon in the right strategy. But we probably should discuss the last card, Hyper Blaze, before discussing any more about the general Sacred Beast advantages and disadvantages. So this is a trap card, a continuous trap card, and this is the Uriah support, and it says, to special summon Uriah using its own procedure, you can send face down traps you control to the graveyard instead of face up ones or any combination of both. So very similar to the card that we just looked at, but for trap cards instead of continuous spells. Once per attack, when an attack is declared involving your Uriah, you can send one trap card from your hand or deck to the graveyard. Its attack and offense becomes 1,000 times the number of traps on the field and in the graveyards for the rest of this turn. Once per turn, you can discard one card, take one Uriah, Hammond, or Raphael from your graveyard and either add it to your hand or special summon it, ignoring its summoning conditions. Now, just upon first glance, I do believe this is probably one of the more powerful new cards. The main issue, though, is that it's a trap card, which is obviously not very fast, but it does seem pretty good in theory for a few reasons. I do not think the first effect in this case will matter, just like in the same way as the last card. I don't think that's a huge sort of hindrance to Sacred Beast strategy. However, the second and third effect are really solid. I would like to clarify for anyone that might be confused about this card or might overestimate how powerful it is, that it does specifically say that the Uriah's attack and defense become 1,000 times the number of traps on the field and in the graveyards. So why does that matter? Well, it matters because the word become in Yu-Gi-Oh! Specifically does mean something very important. It doesn't mean that Uriah gets all that attack on top of what it's already gaining with its own effect. It just means that that is what its attack is for that turn. So in this way, it's like Bujin Crane, which has the exact same text. It says the card becomes double its attack, and that means that no, you don't gain the Uriah attack from the cards in the grave as well as the Hyper Blaze. This makes it a little bit worse, right? Because it means that if you use Hyper Blaze to send one trap to the grave and you already have 3 in the grave from when you summon the Uriah, well, it's only gonna be at 5,000 attack, not something crazy like 9,000. I still think overall this thing will give Uriah way more attack than it would have normally had, specifically because it counts traps on the field and in the graveyards, not just continuous traps and not just your own graveyard. But yeah, it's not quite as powerful as some people might think it is at first glance. Of course, we'll have to wait for the official English text, but assuming it is the same as the OCG translation, which it probably will be because like 99% of cards are, yes, the Uriah will not gain the normal attack from its regular effect. It'll only be what this card gives it. And so far, you might be asking yourself, well, all this seems pretty good, right? What's the downside? Well, the main downside, I mean, these cards individually seem pretty strong. I'm not going to deny that. However, I'm not sure if there's a cohesive win condition out of the Sacred Beast deck. If you're playing the new Raphael card, you just want to be playing a Turbo Fiend deck to summon the Raphael and get that in your hand and just OTK your opponent. If you're playing a Uriah deck, you want to play a whole lot of trap cards and this new Hyper Blaze with Uriah and OTK that way. If you're playing Hammond, which I don't really recommend because the spell card is pretty bad, you're playing a more slower controlling strategy. If you're playing Dimension Fusion Destruction, you probably don't want to care about summoning any of the Sacred Beasts and just focus on using this card and summoning Armatile with 10,000 attack points. The main issue here is that I think the cards, or the new cards at least, are being spread too thin, because it's not so much the Sacred Beast cards getting 5 new options. I mean, that is technically true, but in terms of actually playing a Sacred Beast deck, you're probably not going to use all the new support, so it might not be enough to make a fully fledged strategy. If you're playing Uriah, for example, you're probably not going to play Dimension Fusion Destruction or the Hammond card or the Raphael card, so in that way you're only gaining 6 cards. You're just gaining 3 copies of the Searcher and the new trap. If you're playing Raphael, a very similar thing happens, and the same thing for Hammond. It might just not be enough because there isn't a cohesive deck that wants to use all of these new cards and all of the old cards. I know this might sound confusing, but sort of think about it in this one way. Hopefully this makes sense. Instead of the entire Sacred Beast deck getting all these new support cards, it's more like the Uriah strategy strategy gained 2 new support cards, the Searcher and the Trap. The Hammond strategy gained 2 new cards. The Raphael strategy gained 2 new cards. And the Armatile strategy gained 2 new cards. And sometimes you only need 2 support cards to make a deck go from not very good to very good, but usually the deck has to be pretty decent already. For example, with Spirals, the only true new card they got was Magician Souls, but that was enough alongside a ban list to make them competitively viable and one of the best decks. But Sacred Beasts are nowhere near the level of Spirals in consistency, in power, and versatility, and pretty much everything, which means 2 cards might not be enough to make them a competent rogue strategy, let alone a competitive deck. And sure, we might get maybe 1 or 2 more new cards in this structure deck, but I'm not really sure if even those cards can bring together all these different strategies and truly make them viable decks. It's going to be pretty hard. The card would have to be on the level of like Spellbook of Judgment at this point to actually make Sacred Beast a viable strategy. I really want Sacred Beast to be a fun rogue strategy, maybe even top a couple regionals, but I'm just not sure it's quite there yet with only these cards. This is different than the support being bad, because it's not bad, it just might not be enough to save this deck that already isn't very good. I was really hoping when I saw these Sacred Beast structure decks sort of get announced that we would have a bunch of new cards that could make it viable to actually play all the Sacred Beasts in one deck, but these cards seem very clearly designed to very much so focus on just one Sacred Beast and build your entire deck around that, which might not actually be good enough for competitive play. As always, thank you guys so much for watching today's video. If there are more Sacred Beast cards announced, I will be sure to cover them on this channel. I'm not really sure how likely that is to happen, but it would be pretty cool if it did. I'll see you later though. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Goodbye.